moments will be lost in time like tears in rain.
There are films that define their genre, and then there are films that redefine it. Blade Runner isn't just a sci-fi classic, it's a landmark in filmmaking, a piece of cyberpunk noir that reshaped the way we think about the future. Ridley Scott's vision of 2019 Los Angeles, with its neon-covered streets and perpetual rain, created a world that felt both alien and eerily familiar, influencing everything from anime to video games to modern cinema. But beneath the towering skyscrapers and flickering holograms, Blade Runner is a deeply human story. One that questions identity, memory, and what it truly means to be alive. In this video, we're diving into what makes Blade Runner so enduring. From its production and influences to its thematic depth and multiple cuts, we'll explore why this film has fascinated audiences for over 4 decades. Whether you've seen it a dozen times or you're coming to it fresh, let's take a closer look at one of the most influential sci-fi films ever. Blade Runner wasn't an instant classic, it was a film that had to be rediscovered. When it hit theaters in 1982, audiences were expecting another Star Wars or Indiana Jones, especially with Harrison Ford in the lead. Instead, they got something slow, moody, and existential, a neo-noir detective story wrapped up in a sci-fi dystopia. Critics were divided and the film underperformed at the box office, overshadowed by films like E.T., but over time, Blade Runner found its audience, becoming one of the most influential sci-fi films ever made. The film was adapted from Philip K. Dick's 1968 novel, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, though the final product differs significantly. While Dick's novel explored a post-apocalyptic world filled with artificial animals and a society obsessed with empathy, Blade Runner focused more on the visual and philosophical weight of its setting. The film distilled the book's core themes into something more cinematic, stripping away much of the novel's inner monologues and world building in favor of a more atmospheric, ambiguous experience. Despite its rocky start, Blade Runner was ahead of its time. Over the years, multiple cuts of the film emerged, each reshaping the story and its themes. What began as a niche, divisive film became a touchstone for sci-fi storytelling, proving that sometimes the most visionary works take time to be understood. Blade Runner is a film that feels meticulously crafted, every frame dripping with detail, but behind the scenes, its production was anything but smooth. Ridley Scott, fresh off Alien, had a clear vision for the film, but executing it proved to be a massive challenge. Between an overworked cast, a tight budget, and constant clashes between Scott and the studio, Blade Runner was a production filled with tension, both creative and personal. One of the most defining aspects of Blade Runner is its look. Scott drew inspiration from classic film noir, giving the film its heavy use of shadows, Venetian blinds, and hard-boiled detective tropes. But he also fused that with a futuristic aesthetic influenced by 1927's Metropolis, the artwork of Mobius from Heavy Metal magazine, and even his own childhood memories of industrial England. The end result was a city that felt alive, layered with grime, neon, and oppressive corporate structures looming over the streets. To achieve this, cinematographer Jordan Cronenweth used shadows, practical lighting, and a mix of in-camera effects and miniatures, creating a world that felt tangible. The film's use of smoke, rain, and practical effects wasn't just for atmosphere, it helped blend the physical sets with the miniature cityscapes, making Los Angeles 2019 feel like a real place. Harrison Ford was brought on as Rick Deckard, the weary Blade Runner hunting down rogue replicants. Coming off Indiana Jones and Star Wars, Ford was Hollywood's go-to leading man, but he had a notoriously difficult time on this production. He and Ridley Scott often clashed, and Ford has been vocal about his frustrations with the film, especially the studio-mandated voiceover in the theatrical cut. Opposite him was Rutger Hauer as Roy Batty, the film's most compelling character. Hauer brought a mix of menace and tragedy to the role, making Batty feel less like a villain and more like a desperate dying man trying to find meaning in his short life. His famous Tears in the Rain monologue was partially improvised, cementing it as one of the most memorable moments in sci-fi history. The rest of the cast, including Sean Young as the enigmatic Rachel and Edward James Olmos as the mysterious Gap, helped round out the film's moody, introspective tone. But it was Hauer's performance that truly elevated Blade Runner, turning what could have been a straightforward noir detective story into something far more poetic. Tension behind the scenes wasn't just limited to the actors. Scott, known for his perfectionism, pushed the crew to the limit, leading to long, grueling shoots. The production was plagued by budget concerns, studio interference, and constant rewrites. At one point, Scott's relationship with the crew became so strained that they printed shirts reading, "Yes, Governor, my ass," mocking his British mannerisms. Despite these challenges, the effort paid off. Blade Runner became a technical masterpiece, a film that looked and felt unlike anything before it. But it wasn't just the visuals that made it stand the test of time, it was the themes, the ambiguity, and the deeper questions it posed. As a fan of the original novel and Philip K. Dick's work in general, I see Blade Runner as a very different experience, but one that I appreciate in its own way. The novel and the film explore similar ideas, but they go about it in completely different ways. The book leans into Dick's signature weirdness, full of internal struggles and societal commentary, while the movie is more about atmosphere and visual storytelling. It's less about explaining things and more about letting you sit with the questions it raises. I get why some people think Blade Runner is slow or even boring. It's not a fast-paced movie, and it definitely doesn't spoon-feed its ideas. But that's just a taste thing. What I love about it is how much you can pull from the world and characters just by paying attention. The noir influences, the way characters interact, and all the little details in the background make it feel like a world that exists beyond what you see on the screen. It's the kind of film where you notice something new every time you watch, and that's what keeps me coming back to it. For the rest of the review and video there will be spoilers, so if you haven't seen it, go watch and come back. Blade Runner follows Rick Deckard, a former cop reluctantly pulled back into duty as a Blade Runner, a specialist tasked with hunting down and retiring rogue replicants, artificial humans created by the powerful Tyrell Corporation. His latest assignment is to track down and eliminate 4 escaped replicants hiding in Los Angeles. Unlike traditional sci-fi heroes, Deckard isn't a confident, capable figure. He's weary, hesitant, and often outmatched by the very beings he's hunting. As Deckard investigates, he meets Rachel, a highly advanced replicant who believes she's human. When she learns that her memories were artificially implanted, it shakes her entire sense of self. This moment subtly mirrors Deckard's own journey, as the film continuously blurs the line between human and replicant. The replicants, despite being framed as villains, are the ones actively seeking meaning in their existence, while Deckard is just following orders, going through the motions. Meanwhile, the rogue replicants, led by Roy Batty, aren't simply causing chaos, they're searching for a way to extend their limited lifespans. Their quest takes them through the dark underbelly of the city, exposing the cruelty of the Tyrell Corporation, which creates these beings only to discard them when they're no longer useful. When Roy finally confronts his creator, Elton Tyrell, he pleads for more life, but Tyrell coldly tells him there's no solution and his fate is sealed. In a moment of rage, grief, and existential despair, Roy kills Tyrell, cementing the replicants not as simple antagonists, but as tragic figures fighting against a system that refuses to see them as real. The film builds to a final confrontation between Deckard and Roy, but rather than a traditional action climax, it becomes something far more introspective. As Deckard is left dangling from a rooftop, completely at Roy's mercy, Roy chooses to save him instead of killing him. What follows is the iconic Tears in the Rain monologue, where Roy, at the end of his short life, reflects on the fleeting nature of existence. It's the most powerful moment in the film, recontextualizing everything that came before. Who really deserves to live, and what truly makes someone human? Then there's the lingering question that has fueled debate for decades. Is Deckard a replicant? While the film never gives a definitive answer, and depending on which version you watch, you might lean one way or the other, it ultimately isn't about that, it's about the question. If replicants can love, fear, and reflect on their existence, does it even matter if Deckard is one of them? The noir influence is at its strongest here, presenting a protagonist who, like many classic detective characters, discovers that the truth isn't as simple as he once believed. What interests me most about Blade Runner is the tragic dynamic of the replicants' artificial lives, how their brief existence and the tension between their fake memories and real experiences shape their behavior. None of these characters are older than 4 years physically, but the psychological and emotional weight they carry is immense. Chris in particular is heartbreaking in this regard. On the surface, she's a pleasure model created to serve others, but underneath that, she's clearly struggling with the fact that she's mentally a teenager in a body designed for adult use. This makes her existence all the more tragic. She was built to please, to entertain, yet her inner life is one of confusion, frustration, and isolation. Roy, the most sophisticated of the group, tries to deal with his knowledge of his impending death by searching for a way to extend his life, but his journey is one of existential desperation. Zora, somewhere between the emotional maturity of Roy and the childlike impulses of Leon, also grapples with her fate but in a more reactive way. Her final moments show that she too is struggling with the injustice of her short existence. Leon, the youngest mentally, reacts with a kind of innocent rage, almost like a child lashing out in confusion and hurt. The dynamic here is fascinating to me because it's about confronting the absurdity of life, how these characters built for a specific purpose and with a built-in expiration date come to terms with the fact that they can never truly live, never experience a natural progression of time. Their fake memories provide a semblance of a full life, but when faced with their reality, they're forced to reckon with the fact that they're designed to die long before they feel they've had a chance to fully experience the world for themselves. That duality, the awareness of their physical limitations, against the backdrop of their mental complexity, gives Blade Runner its emotional punch. Outside of the narrative, visually Blade Runner remains one of the most influential films ever made. Ridley Scott and the cinematographer Jordan created a stunning atmospheric world filled with neon-lit streets, towering skyscrapers, and constant rain that perfectly reflects the film's dystopian tone. The city of Los Angeles feels lived in and oppressive, its futuristic tech blending with decaying infrastructure, creating a sense of timelessness that still feels relevant today. The special effects, especially for 1982, were groundbreaking, using practical sets, miniatures, and early CGI to create the iconic flying cars and the massive imposing cityscape. The film's use of lighting and shadow, characteristic of the noir genre, enhances the moral ambiguity for its characters. Deckard, for instance, is often shot in shadows, a visual cue to his morally grey nature as he hunts replicants that seem more human with every passing scene. The soundtrack composed by Vangelis further elevates the film's mood, blending haunting electronic melodies and atmospheric synths that echo the film's themes of isolation and humanity in a dehumanized world. A lot has happened for Blade Runner since the original film, most notably the 2017 sequel Blade Runner 2049. Both of the films are polarizing in their own way. While I prefer the original, I still appreciate what 2049 managed to accomplish. Creating a satisfying sequel to the original 35 years later was always going to be a near impossible task. Outside of the sequel, it's mostly been supplemental material through novels, comics, and video games. They did have an original anime that aired on Adult Swim a couple years ago. There was a lot of promotion for it, even going as far as to have live music and a pretty cool drone show. Unfortunately, a lot of people completely checked out of it and felt let down from the stylish marketing. Still, the fact that Blade Runner continues to inspire new projects shows that the franchise has life left in it. Whether through new films, games, or other media, there's always potential to expand on its world in a meaningful way. While not everything will resonate with every fan, I have hope for the future of the franchise and look forward to seeing where it goes next. With that being said, the original Blade Runner is iconic. You can see the DNA in it almost everywhere, whether it be gaming, anime, or literature. While many of the original criticisms of Blade Runner have gone on to plague the franchise, it's still a film that is without a doubt worth going out of your way to watch. Now that I've given my opinion, I'm curious what you guys have to say. How do you feel about Blade Runner in 2025? Do you think the sequel lived up to the hype, or do you think it should have stayed a lone film? Are you excited for any of the upcoming projects? Be sure to let us know in the comments below. Thanks for making it until the end of the video. Leave a like and consider subscribing to the channel. Here at Inner Spiral, we cover the games, movies, and shows we all love. So be sure to join us, and I'll see you next time in the Spiral.